I'm the opinions guy. He's the numbers guy.
Okay. Is that a beer or is that something else?
Oh, that's definitely a beer. I'm 35 with a kid. That's a beer.
Oh, yeah? Oh, dude, I'm 50 with 2 kids.
Yeah, so you should have 2 beers.
I should have 2 beers. Okay, I can hear you. So I'm going to make you a these and this.
Okay. What kind of mic are you using?
This is a Blue Yeti.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It does the trick. What do you got going on there for your mic?
I have, so I come from the audio and music industry. So I only use analog microphones. This is an MXL CR77. So it's like a broadcast style mic. So I have 2 mics I use. I have this one, and then I have a large diaphragm condenser microphone that I use. But I use those for voiceovers, and I use these for like podcast and live use. But I use that, and I have a specialized mixer that loops everything back through for me, as opposed to having to do it myself. So yeah,
cool.
I'm a bit of a mic snob. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, well, let's hop into this and we'll get started.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so right now I have Adam, and it's from Romantic About Baseball, and he's going to give us a quick little blurb about his podcast and what it covers. So now I'll just leave it up to you.
Sure. So thanks for having me on, Mike. Romantic About Baseball is it's sort of a blending of the narrative and the numbers, as we call it. You know, the baseball lives in a very interesting world where you have the objective, you know, hard numbers, hard statistics, hard facts, and they butt up against the subjective, you know, the opinions, you know, this player did this better than that, or this team does this better than that. So what we like to do is we have we do everything from long form interviews with guests. We've been very fortunate to have both professional players, journalists, writers, social media personalities, everything on the show to just talk about the game, talk about their process, and talk about the things that maybe we don't always, you know, we're not newsbreakers. You know, you're not going to get the latest headlines from us, from myself and my co-host Jim Passon Jr. You're not going to get the latest breaking news. You're not going to get the highest, you know, level interviews all the time. But what you're going to get is an interesting conversation and something that I guarantee you we always try to ask people questions that they haven't heard before. And that's what we go for.
And how did you get into this podcast, just so you're across it? Like, what made you start it, and then how did Jim come onto it?
Sure. So I had done it myself a couple of times, just, you know, we're talking maybe 2014 or so, 2015, just because. But what happened was the podcast is actually an extension of the blog of the romanticaboutbaseball.com, where I write, you know, historical pieces, opinion pieces, statistical pieces, things of that nature. But I had been sending this stuff out, you know, these articles out to anyone that would read them within the baseball Twitter community. And Jim was nice enough to not only read it, but get back to me and said that he really enjoyed it. And so Jim Passon, for those who don't know, is an extremely well-respected statistics guy. We call him the Stat Master General. He read it. He read the material. He really liked it, and we came on and we just sort of linked up. And our mind is routinely blown by the caliber of guests that we've had the privilege of talking to.
Oh, that's quite cool. Now, do you just cover baseball, or are you into all sports yourself?
I have a working knowledge of other sports. You know, I live in Atlanta. However, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan in football. I'm a Flyers fan in hockey. But baseball, at the level of which we discuss, you know, the game and things like that, we're really baseball people far and away, first and foremost.
Oh, that's cool. And how long is each podcast? You just say, like, how many minutes on average?
We really try to our range is anywhere from 40 minutes at the very shortest to about an hour and 10 to hour and 20 minutes at the longest. We're shooting for some longer form episodes coming up in the coming season, where we may push those boundaries of the longest episodes. But I would say ultimately we try to keep it shorter than most, longer than some, if that makes sense.
Well, that's the thing with sports podcasts is they can be a quick 10-minute headline grab, or they could be an hour-long in-depth about just one player and what's happening with them.
Well, exactly right. Yeah, it's important too, because we're not news breakers, and we go way out of our way to say that. Like, if you're looking for the headlines, I can give you the names of about 10 or 20 people that are 100 times more qualified than we are. What you won't find is, yelling, screaming, talking over anyone. We like to think of it as like a place to have an educated conversation about a game that requires educated conversation.
No, that's one way of looking at it. Now, what podcast do you listen to yourself? Like your top 3, for example.
So my top 3 would probably be Fresh Air with Terry Gross. I take a lot of as many cues as I can from her on interviewing. When we do have guests and things like that, I really do enjoy listening to her and her style of interviewing. Effectively Wild is a podcast from a site called Fangraphs, which is a very well-respected statistical community in baseball world. They're masters at banter. Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller, who are the hosts, and Meg Rowley, who also hosts it, who is my favorite writer. They do a great job at banter and kind of like organic conversation. I really enjoy it. And third would be, I really like what Shankar Vedantam does on Hidden Brain. I think he does some really interesting conversations and kind of everything in that NPR vein. I really, really, really enjoy.
I've never heard of any of those. I do like NPR podcasts though, but of all those, I haven't heard of any of them.
Yeah, if you enjoy interviews, Terry Gross is the master of her craft. If you're somebody that I think that Effectively Wild is not for it's like the whiskey of baseball podcasts. It's not for everyone, but if you enjoy that type of conversation, if you enjoy about an hour and a half to 2 hours of not knowing what's going to happen, in a very sort of, sedated kind of way, like they're very kind of like low key, again, no yelling, no screaming, no shouting. I can't deal with shows and podcasts that do a lot of that type of stuff.
Oh, for sure. And how do you find time as a dad of one to listen to those podcasts?
It's car rides. I come from the music industry, and nothing will sour your taste on music than working in the music industry. So a lot of my time in the car, I take my daughter to daycare every day, and that gives me about 30 to 40 minutes of listening. I just, when I did work full time, I worked about 13 years in retail. It was to work about an hour, at home about an hour. And that gave me a lot of time to kind of catch up. You know what I mean? When I could listen to whatever I wanted.
Yeah, mine is involved with walking my dog.
Yeah, it's funny because it's something where right now I'm actually I left retail. Now I'm in the process of learning how to code, and that's something that I do like to have on in the background a little bit too. Just to have some conversation, because it can get kind of quiet when you're just clacking away on the computer for a while.
Yeah. What are you programming?
I'm in the process of learning right now. So
like Python or
Python, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, React, the whole nine. So I'm in the process of learning it all.
Okay. Have you tried Lua? Lua?
I haven't. No, it's been mentioned, but it's not part of my curriculum just yet. Do you use it?
Yeah. No, well, I played with everything. I used to be assistant administrator, and then I've been doing this since like the mid 90s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, you can tell there's this hair. What's left of it is all gray.
Yeah,
all gray and white.
Yeah, I'll be there too, I'm sure. But it's for right now, it's the exciting part. I'm in the honeymoon phase with it right now.
Oh yeah, and you'll need a good keyboard too. It's pretty soon, like you just said, you're a microphone snob. Well, before you know it, you'll be a keyboard snob, just because you're going to keep playing with these.
Yeah,
and you're going to try to find a really comfortable one.
I'm getting there already.
Yeah. So going into the hardware, what kind of microphone setup did you say you had again?
Yeah, so I typically have two microphones that I'll use. I have I tend to prefer analog microphones. You had nothing wrong with USB mics. I think they're excellent for folks who really want to kind of get a quick setup. The Blue Yeti, the Shure MV5s are great, but I prefer analog mics. The one I'm using right now is an MXL CR77. It is a dynamic microphone. It's a little bit, it very much gets by on its looks. It resembles that of like the old broadcast and TV microphones. And so this one I use for regular podcasts. It's a little brighter. My voice can be a little nasally, so I tend to prefer that. For voiceovers and intros and things of that nature, I use an MXL CR30, which is a condenser mic, has a lot more low end. And I run that to a Yamaha AG03, which is a mixer that uses something called a loopback function. It's much easier to work with for podcasting and Zoom, because as you know, a lot of folks that do podcasts is one of the most reliably growing form mediums of entertainment, and not everybody is versed on this stuff. So.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this kind of podcast, is because I want other podcasters to be able to hear what's happening with the hardware, for example, what's happening with software, and what they can go and try. Like, I mean, how many people do you know that just use their phones? Probably, a lot of them. And you can tell.
It is. And like, for example, I produce a podcast for a book club, the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. And so what you do is you're dealing with a lot of folks, and I don't mean this derogatorily at all, because a lot of us were kind of thrust into this situation where podcasting became necessary. Folks who don't know how to do a lot of the stuff with audio and the technology and things of that nature. So a lot of that has to do, like, I think what you're doing is great. It's educating people on what they can do and the type of equipment that they need, because everybody's got a podcast these days. So, audio quality is one way to set yourself apart.
Yeah, it's doubled I remember I started listening to podcasts in 2005 on my BlackBerry when you had to download the MP3 file, put it onto an SD card, and then pop it into your phone. And that was for my commute on the subway kind of thing. But now going into the editing portion, do you edit your podcast? And if so, what kind of software do you use?
Yes, I do. I do. I guess I do what you call end-to-end production. So I record it, I edit it, and I upload it, and I do all the back-end stuff with it too. I use a program called Studio One, which is from Presonus. This is a program that I had when I was doing music production and recording. It does I used to use a great percentage of what it had to offer. Now with podcast production, I use a fraction, but it was, it's what I have, so that's what I use. Yes, I use that for editing. I use that to help with the music bumpers and things of that nature too.
Okay. And are you part of a like a podcasting group or community at all? Like, when you say that you're doing this with the bumpers, do you have advertisers? Like, are you monetizing your podcast?
Not yet. We haven't quite reached that level of listenership. I think to really make the monetization worth it. We've had some offers from networks and groups to kind of come in and be part of the fold. But, I think ultimately one thing that is important to me is integrity of advertising. I think that with what advertisers in some cases tend to be a little predatory in terms of how they find a young, or a newer podcast, and they come in, and now, next thing you know, you're trying to have an educated, a nice conversation with someone, and then you got to go talk about like I don't know, hair, manscaping products or something like that. I never quite vibed with that. And I'm very fortunate, that I don't financially need that. So I haven't done that quite yet. Now the music bumpers I'd use from old projects that I worked on, like bands that I was in or music that I had written, or I'd gotten permission from previous bands to use. So I'll use those.
That's a good way of doing it. Okay, and then where are you hosting your podcast right now?
So I right now I'm on SoundCloud. If anyone from SoundCloud is listening, I'm heavily considering changing because it's getting a little much with the nickel and dime stuff. But the podcast that I produce on as well, they use Anchor, and I'm really impressed with Anchor's format, with the way that Anchor does things. I think it's really user friendly. I think it's really good. SoundCloud's been there. We've been hosted on SoundCloud for over a year now, and I like their analytics. I like the way they lay out their stats and everything. But it's a little much with the nickel and diming.
Yeah, actually, I'm a big fan of Anchor. I use it myself. My issue with it though was it does the one upload and it submits it to all the RSS feeds. But when it comes down to the actual stats, you're not really getting in-depth stats because Apple's holding everything back. So if you want to get Apple's probably the #1 podcast player, and if you want to get their stats, you have to upload to them directly, because once you go through Anchor, then it's like, oh, we're not going to show you anything.
And I'll be honest with you, I was extremely disappointed with Apple's analytics and the way that they track their stats and everything. I mean, I actually have a centralized spreadsheet that I use to track each provider and figure out where am I prioritizing my attention and things like that. And I really got frustrated with Apple's format, but you're correct. They are the most popular. So
I was going to say, you're taking this really quite seriously, but if you're into baseball, then you're a stats guy anyway. So if you're using a spreadsheet,
I love data. I love data. And, I have, I don't have anywhere near the listenership, to really take it like a business necessarily, but I'd like to think I'd like to be prepared if I do, if that makes sense.
It is. Yeah, if you ever do go hunting down sponsors, it is nice to say, well, we've had this many listeners on SoundCloud, this many on Apple, this many on
so
forth.
Now
your demographics.
I like to, it's important to know your plan of attack. If you're a podcaster, you need to know who has the best looking, one of the reasons we picked SoundCloud as a host was because they have the best looking widgets for embedding. And it seems superficial, but like at one point on the website, we actually had every embedded widget for every episode laid out on the page so people could conveniently click down. You like that episode? Click the next one, click the next one. That was something that Anchor didn't offer. But unfortunately, the catalog's gotten so long enough at this point, I can't really do that anymore. But yeah, so it matters where you host.
Yes. And how many episodes have you made so far?
We just recorded episode 51 last week. That's been since October of 2019. So we've taken some breaks. We've only really had one real format change where, we changed the theme music. We changed we haven't undergone any real makeovers yet, but we did have a distinct we did about 35 episodes of long form interviews with folks, with writers and players and things like that. And the last, say 16 episodes have been a little more free form, sometimes guests, sometimes just me and Jim. It just depends.
Yeah. Well, you really need someone else to bounce the ideas off. I used to do scripted podcasts, and I found it was just, you're sucking in 6 to 10 hours per podcast just to write it all out, script it, then record it for 5 or 6 listeners. I'm like, oh my God, this is just going to kill me. I need to switch to an interview format so that I could just talk off the top of my head and spit all this goo out at people.
Right. Well, and preparation's a big deal. I always tell people embrace your mistakes because, perfect example. I had a guy named Jeff Passon come on our podcast, and this is somebody my host's name is Jim Passon. Yeah. And this guy's name is Jeff Passon. He's the senior writer at ESPN. He's the industry newsbreaker. He had no business coming on our rinky dink little show. Right. but we had been, teasing him throughout several episodes, like, hey, come on the show, come on the show. He finally comes on the show, and I call his book the wrong name.
Oh.
And he was absolutely just a total champ about it. He was super graceful. It was a wonderful interview. But I tell people, embrace your mistakes, because I could have edited it all out and it would have been a fine episode and it would have been okay. But embrace your mistakes, because to this day, it is my favorite interview, because it went from fine to complete train wreck to the most fun.
Yeah, that works. Okay, dude, I think we've covered everything we need to do. Where can people find you online?
Sure. So you can find me mostly on Twitter at Adam C Mac, ADAMC MACK. And the blog is at RMNTC Baseball. So like romantic without the vowels, baseball, and at romanticaboutbaseball.com.
Okay, now really quickly explain, how did you get that name again?
It was just, I wish I had a more, no pun intended, romantic way to say it, but I was watching Moneyball, the movie, the 2015 movie with Brad Pitt, and he said, how can you not be romantic about baseball? And I thought, why isn't there a website named that? So I did it.
Oh, good score, man. I'd be pretty happy with that too. And your hat, what hat is that?
So that is the Portland Pickles. It is an independent league team. I'm in Atlanta. I'm a diehard Braves fan, but a guest of the show, a guy named Rob Nyer, legendary baseball writer. He actually is the commissioner of a league called the West Coast League. And he came on the show and totally sold me on the league and everything like that. So I'm a Portland Pickles fan, despite never been to Portland.
Yeah. All right, dude. I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on here.
Okay. Well, have a good time, my friend.
Yeah. Thanks very much for everything.
Happy to do it, sir. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.